On an autumn afternoon in Stockholm, a small clinic gathered dozens of curious people. They were about to become part of something that, until recently, existed only in science fiction stories. On a stainless steel table, a nurse was sanitizing an object the size of a grain of rice. It was a subcutaneous microchip, capable of storing data, opening doors, functioning as a train ticket, and even replacing bank cards. In the quiet hallways of that modern building, the atmosphere was one of novelty. But something in the technical gaze of the developers left a different feeling in the air. It seemed like this was just the beginning. Since the Swedish startup Biohacks International popularized the use of these chips, more than 6,000 people in the country have adopted the technology. At first, the benefits seemed clear: convenience, security, innovation. But alongside the excitement, discreet reports began to emerge about unusual behaviors, private events requiring the chip for entry, and even veiled comments from scientists about frequencies emitted by the device. Amid smiles and promises of a more efficient future, a question was forming among those who watched from afar, in silence. Could the true purpose of this technology go far beyond what is being shown? Welcome to another night where mysteries never sleep. I'm Midnight, and this is 7 Nights. Before we begin, I'd like to ask for your help. Like the video, comment, and subscribe to the channel. It's just a click, but it makes a huge difference for YouTube to deliver these videos to more people, and for me to keep bringing this content to you. I'm counting on you. Let's get to the video. Picture this with me. You walk into a well-lit room, sign a simple form, extend your hand, and in less than 10 minutes, a capsule the size of a grain of rice is inserted under your skin. Done. You're connected. Sounds like science fiction, right? But it's not. This started happening in Swedish clinics a few years ago. And the strangest part, it didn't cause controversy. On the contrary, most people thought it was incredible. The subcutaneous chip became a craze among technology enthusiasts. It was marketed as something practical, modern, efficient. You could use it to open doors, take the subway, pay a bill, enter the office, all with a wave of the hand. And behind it all was a company called Biohacks International, founded by a former piercer who suddenly began speaking at global events about the future of humanity. His name? Johan Osterland. And it was he who said the phrase that spread like a disturbing whisper: the future will be coded into the skin. Think about that carefully. Coded into the skin. Not on the phone. Not in the cloud. In your body. What used to be an accessory became part of who you are. And people accepted it. Dozens, then hundreds, until over 6,000 people were implanted within a few years. Sweden became an open-air experiment. And all without scandal, without headlines, without revolt. Why? Because the way it was introduced was subtle. Elegant even. The chip didn't come as an imposition. It came as a convenience. A gift. Who would refuse something that saves time, gives you VIP access, frees you from passwords and keys? When a proposal is sold as evolution, who dares to say no? But what seemed like progress began to reveal other layers. Private events began to appear. Some, you could only enter if you had the chip. Such reports began to repeat. Discreet gatherings with important people in monitored locations. Nothing illegal, but strange. Why limit access based on an implant? What's happening in there that can't be seen by those who aren't marked? Some began reporting strange sensations. Not pain, nothing alarming, but subtle discomforts, changes in sleep, tingling, that persistent feeling of being watched. Details that, in isolation, don't mean much. But when they repeat in patterns, can we still call it coincidence? That's when a new version of the chip emerged. One that emitted a constant frequency. Officially, it was to maintain connection with smart systems. But a group of independent engineers published an analysis that said otherwise. According to them, that frequency could interact with the body's electromagnetic fields. The study went offline shortly after, silenced, and that, in itself, is strange enough. Meanwhile, the chip continued to spread. Buildings began adopting the system. Offices started to require it. Banks tested payments using the implant. And those who didn't use it started to be left out. No one said it openly, but exclusion was already in motion. It was subtle, almost invisible, but real. It went beyond technology. It became a symbol. Having the chip meant you understood the future. Not having it meant resistance, fear, misinformation. The pressure didn't come by force. It came through status, through belonging. And once again, control disguised itself as progress. The strangest part? Almost no one knew what was inside the chip, nor who had full control over it. Updates were remote, permissions invisible. The data? Fluid. It was packed with something you couldn't see, but that now was part of you. And if all of this changes tomorrow, who guarantees you'll even notice? The acceptance was so fast that few people stopped to think. All of this came too soon, and too easily. When technology enters through the skin, it's no longer a tool. It's part of the body. And when the body is part of the system, what's left that's still truly yours? The chip wasn't imposed. It was offered, with a smile, a handshake, and now thousands have already accepted. But did they really know what they were receiving? Have you ever stopped to think about the weight a single phrase can carry? The future will be coded in the skin. It was the chip's own creator, Johan Osterland, who said this before a smiling audience at a technology event. Many applauded, as if it were an inspiring vision. But what if that phrase wasn't just a prediction? What if it was a warning? To code something means to transform it into language. A message, an instruction, a command. When that happens in the digital world, that's fine. But when we talk about coding the skin, what exactly is being programmed? And who has access to that code? Osterland's statement went unnoticed by many, but in more attentive circles, it raised an alert. After all, he didn't say with the skin. He said in the skin, a subtle but powerful difference. We're not talking about wearable tech, nor about external gadgets. We're talking about the body being transformed into a system. In other words, what was once a simple data transport medium now becomes a living platform. And when the body becomes a platform, it can also become a tool. A tool for what? That depends on who's holding the controls. Patent documents associated with recent versions of the chip show that it can be updated remotely, send encrypted signals, and even store commands that are triggered by geolocation. In other words, it's not just receiving information. It can also execute pre-programmed actions, depending on where the person is. Now think with me, what would this kind of function be used for? In one of the rare long interviews he gave, Osterland commented that the idea was to make the human body compatible with the systems in the surrounding environment. Cold, calculated, like someone who knows more than they're allowed to say. And he wasn't the only one. Other developers tied to the project, when speaking about the chip's future, used terms like adaptive behavior and neurocompatible interaction. Nice-sounding expressions, but ones no one really explains. At the same time, reports began to surface of parallel tests in secret corporate environments. Employees received chips with different functions. One group used it only for authentication, another for environment control, light, sound, temperature. But a third group, one not mentioned in official documents, allegedly tested a version of the chip that interacted with emotional states. The problem is, no one was able to confirm anything publicly. But the rumors didn't stop. Some patents associated with the technology mention the term emotional biometrics. It's a concept that seeks to capture the body's real-time reactions, changes in heart rate, microfacial expressions, muscle responses. With that, it would be possible to identify fear, anxiety, frustration in real time. Imagine the value of that for a company, or for a government. And here comes the unsettling question. If all this is already being developed, and it is, what's stopping the chip in the future from also acting as a transmitter of stimuli? A device that not only records, but induces. Could that be the next step? The most unsettling thing about all this is that no one seems interested in clarifying. The questions are ignored. Independent studies vanish. The interviews are generic. And meanwhile, acceptance keeps growing. People keep getting implanted, not knowing that there's a phrase buried right there beneath the skin. The future will be coded. But when that future fully arrives, will we still be the ones writing the code? Up to this point, the idea of the chip seems to stay within the limits of convenience. You wave your hand, and you're home. You touch the office door, it opens. Everything automated, no keys, no cards. But what if I told you those doors are just the beginning? That there's another kind of access, far more restricted and far less talked about? Reports began to surface about events that only allowed entry through the chip. Discreet meetings held in remote locations with reinforced security and no publicity. No invitations, no guest list, just one requirement. The chip had to be active, registered, validated. And not just any chip. Specific versions, with protocols that were not publicly available. One of the first signs came from a private conference in Germany, where a team of technicians involved in the setup claimed that the access readers were configured not only to detect the presence of the chip, but also its internal signature. This meant the device carried a kind of hidden profile, a silent code that authorized or denied entry. But entry to where? And to witness what? The companies behind these events never made statements. Records are scarce, nearly non-existent. But eyewitness accounts align. Minimalist environments, mirrored screens, sensors everywhere, and strict silence protocols. People entering, but almost no one speaking about what happened inside. Why so much secrecy? In one of the rare off-record interviews, a former employee of a digital security company stated that he attended a meeting where chips were used not just for identification, but for internal mapping. The location of each person was tracked in real time, not via GPS, but through environmental sensors synchronized with the chip. A kind of closed precision geolocation. But why map everything with such accuracy? Some of these locations reportedly had signal-proof rooms, protected against any kind of external transmission. Once inside, no one could leave until the meeting ended. And in certain cases, the chips were reprogrammed on-site. This information is extremely sensitive and rarely documented. But there is one constant. Those who left these gatherings never gave interviews, never published anything, and many simply disappeared from social media. What's most unsettling about all this is that these events aren't isolated. They've been increasing in frequency, and they're happening in strategic cities: Stockholm, Berlin, Singapore, San Francisco. Always near innovation hubs or headquarters of major tech companies. And always with the same pattern: chip-only access, no exceptions. What is being discussed in these spaces that demands this level of control? If it were only about security, simpler methods would suffice. Biometric cards, visual IDs. But no, the chip requirement goes beyond authentication. It acts as a filter. Only those who are marked, literally, may enter. And if the chip identifies, selects, tracks, what else is it activating inside? And here's where things start to get even darker. In private forums, rumors surfaced that these events are testing technologies for group behavioral response. The chip would act as a trigger, emitting a specific signal in a closed room, causing participants to unconsciously react in the same way. Collective influence tests, social experiments, emotional control. No one confirms, but no one denies it either. The absence of official answers is the most frightening part. Everything is treated as fiction, but never with clarity, never with explanation. And meanwhile, these gatherings continue to take place, increasingly closed off, more silent, and more frequent. And those who try to investigate either disappear from the map or give up along the way. When we open physical doors with technology, it already changes the way we interact with the world. But when those doors grant access to hidden realities, where control is absolute and silence is law, we have to ask, what's really on the other side? Because some doors were never meant to be opened, and others, once opened, never close again. There's something almost no one pays attention to when talking about implanted technology: frequency emission. It sounds like just a technical detail, right? A weak, inaudible signal that ensures communication between the chip and surrounding systems. But what if I told you that this frequency wasn't made just for the systems? In the latest version of the chip, unveiled in closed tech environments, it was revealed that it emits a continuous, low-intensity frequency. Nothing that interferes with devices, at least not officially. But independent specialists, including some in the medical field, began noticing something unusual. Patients with the chip reported sleep disturbances, memory lapses, and brief episodes of disorientation, always without an apparent cause. These isolated reports began to form a pattern. In private discussion groups, testimonies emerged that sounded almost copied from one another. Waking up in the middle of the night for no reason. Hearing faint sounds in silent environments. Unusual thermal sensations, even without environmental changes. Coincidence? Or the body responding to something it doesn't yet know how to decode? The human body is sensitive to electrical impulses. This isn't a theory, it's a fact. Our brain, our nerves, everything operates through internal electrical signals. And when a chip starts emitting a continuous frequency, even a minimal one, It's introducing a new variable into this natural system. An external variable. One that wasn't born with you, but is now part of you. An analysis released by engineers in Norway pointed out that, in certain configurations, the chip could generate waves around 13.56 megahertz. Technically, this is the communication standard for RFID. But that value is close to frequencies that, according to some neuroscience studies, can affect light-brain rhythms, such as those linked to alertness and relaxation. Nothing that causes a blackout, but enough to subtly alter behaviors. Now think with me, if it's possible to alter your state of alertness, even by a few degrees, then it's already possible to influence decisions, reactions, behaviors, without you knowing, without you noticing. A 1% adjustment might not transform you, but 1,000 people altered by 1% are no longer quite the same. Some researchers call this passive behavioral interference. It's not direct control, it's modulation, a kind of invisible suggestion planted in your physical state without directly invading your thoughts. You're still you, but slightly different, a little more agitated, a little more apathetic, a little more obedient. Marketing companies have been studying this for years, how to use subtle stimuli to generate emotional responses. Colors, sounds, patterns. Now imagine that being done inside your body. A pulse, a code, a command, and all you have to do is keep living normally. This isn't fiction. Documented projects exist, like the DARPA Mind Control Interface in the United States, which study ways to remotely manipulate perception. And if a chip in your body begins operating at similar levels, how would you even know? The answer is simple, you wouldn't. Most implanted people will never notice anything, because the goal was never to cause discomfort. It was to adjust. Small calibrations that, over time, build a new kind of human more compatible, more connected, more predictable. The question now is no longer whether the chip can be used to track. That's obvious. The real question is it already being used to influence? And if it is, how would we even know if our own signals are no longer just ours? None of this started with the chip, and maybe that's the most important point in this whole story. What we're seeing now is just the final tip of a line that has been carefully drawn, in silence, for decades. And each step was taken as if it were just another evolution. But when we connect everything, the picture that emerges is very different. In the 1990s, the first major population databases emerged. It was the beginning of mass digitalization. Civil records, medical histories, banking data. Everything began migrating to servers. The argument was simple: security and organization. But right there, the world was already beginning to abandon paper. And with it, direct control. Years later came biometrics. Fingerprints, facial scanning, voice recognition. Again, sold as progress. Faster, safer, and of course, harder to fake, but also harder to refuse. After all, how do you say no to a system that requires your fingerprint to release your salary? That's where freedom started being traded for convenience. In 2007, with the launch of the first iPhone, smartphones became part of each person's identity. Geolocation, search history, active listening. All of that became routine, and no one stopped to think, at what point exactly did the phone stop being a tool and become an invisible leash? The following decade only deepened that. Smart bracelets, connected homes, virtual assistants listening to everything. More and more, people got used to giving up privacy in exchange for comfort. Each small concession was made voluntarily, and that's how the system understood. Control doesn't need to be imposed. It just needs to be offered the right way. Meanwhile, data protection laws evolved slowly, always behind the pace of technology. By the time a new law took effect, the systems had already moved another step forward. It was like chasing the wind. And the public? More dependent each day, more vulnerable each day. In 2013, Edward Snowden revealed to the world the mass surveillance systems used by intelligence agencies. The reaction was global, but short-lived. In less than a year, everything went back to normal. People knew they were being watched, and they kept using the same devices, the same apps, the same habits. Why did that happen? Because control no longer needed to hide. It was already part of daily life. Only one detail remained: the complete fusion between body and system. And the chip was exactly that. When the chip was introduced as a method of payment, identification, access, it didn't arrive as a rupture. It arrived as a conclusion. the final piece of a puzzle that had been assembled over decades. And no one saw the full board because each piece came in a nice package with a smile saying, "It's for your own good." The timeline reveals an uncomfortable truth. Humanity isn't being pushed. It's being guided. And with a cruel twist, the more you participate, the more you think you're in control. But the real question that needs to be asked now is, what if total control is already active and no one has noticed because everyone wanted to be part of it? The question almost no one wants to ask is exactly this. What if everything we've been talking about here is already reality? What if the plan isn't under construction, but rather in silent execution? Because the truth is, the chip no longer seems like a promise. It's already here, installed, active, functioning. More than 6,000 people in Sweden alone. Implants happening at sponsored events, inside companies, universities. New versions of the device being tested without any official disclosure. And the most important detail, no one is asking for explanations. No major institution is demanding transparency. Because apparently acceptance has already been achieved. There's no resistance anymore. There's adaptation. People aren't asking whether the chip is safe, ethical, or reversible. They're asking when it will be compatible with more functions, when it will unlock more conveniences. The question is no longer if, it's when. And here lies the darkest part of this story. Everything seems to be following a script. Each new function is released strategically. Payments, identification, access. Then tracking, frequency, synchronization with other systems. The chip becomes the nucleus of daily life, and daily life begins to shape itself around it. There are records, though scarce, of companies testing security protocols based on physiological responses measured by the chip. If a person's body shows tension, anxiety, or any abnormal alteration, the system blocks access automatically. This is sold as protection, but it's also the beginning of active emotional surveillance. If this chip starts determining where you can go, what you can access, and how your body is reacting to all of it, then it's not just identifying you, it's shaping you. And that makes the question even more serious. Are you still the owner of yourself? The most perverse part is that all of this was offered kindly. No one forced the chip. It was offered as an option. But today, those who don't accept it are beginning to be excluded. Soon, perhaps, they won't be able to access basic services. A new kind of social system begins to form, the compatible and the non-compatible. Some call it evolution, others inevitable progress. But history shows that every empire of control begins like this, with the seduction of efficiency. And when the chains are made of convenience, no one tries to break them. On the contrary, people ask for them to be tightened. Maybe the plan was never the chip itself. Maybe it's just the seed. The real goal could be what comes after, the total fusion between body, network, and behavior. A system where every thought is anticipated, every reaction is measured, and every step is predictable. If the end is already installed, then we're not moving toward it. We're living inside it. Only like every good illusion, it looks far too much like freedom. And the final question lingers in the air. Is there still time to get out? Or has the world already become part of the system before even realizing it? The chip was only the beginning. A small device that opened physical doors, but also silently unveiled gateways to something much deeper. Control didn't arrive with screams, it arrived with smiles. It wasn't imposed by force, it was chosen. And now, what once seemed like convenience is revealed as structure. A system that feeds on acceptance, that grows with every unthinking yes, that installs itself not just in the skin, but in the daily routine, in logic, in culture. This story is just one piece, and one day, maybe you'll see the entire puzzle. If this made you think too, subscribe, like the video. It helps the channel grow. Don't forget to share, because more voices mean more discoveries.